many of you struggle with your resilience? Feeling that you've just not quite got enough in the tank some days, that it's like pushing water uphill, and other days you can change the world. I've spent 25 years running teams in corporate environments until 3.5 years ago when I set up my own business, and resilience has been an issue throughout, both in a corporate and in a personal context. And I suspect it's the same for most of you in the room as well. So I want to talk to you today about how we can improve our resilience and how we can build psychological safety for the teams that we look after. How many of you run teams or are responsible for other employees? About half of you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our personal resilience when you're running a business. There's only you to rely on. But also how we can help build resilience for our teams if you're responsible for other people as well. So I'm Sarah, I'm a leadership and performance coach. I spent, as I said, 25 years in technology operations, customer operations, running teams, working in a really wide range of industries from internet through utilities, working for some good bosses and some good environments, but more often than not, really bad bosses and very political and toxic, to put not too fine a point on it, organisations. And I learned, sometimes the hard way, about how to look after myself and look after my teams. 3.5 years ago, I set up my business because I wanted to impact more people who were struggling with resilience in the workplace, who were struggling with performance, who weren't supported by their managers, who weren't supported by their organisations. So that's what I do. I help people and businesses manage change, manage performance in the workplace through leadership coaching, team coaching, and various workshops. So what is resilience? There have been vast amounts of academic work done on what is resilient, what is it that makes us resilient, what is it that keeps us on track. And in 2013, the Resilience at Work scale was launched and it was taken on by Gallup. Gallup use it to underpin their employee engagement surveys, and it's then been used by huge numbers of organisations to help them build employee engagement. Interestingly, probably not a surprise to anyone in the room, but a surprise to many of the male clients that I talk to, businesses that have really truly engaged employees are 147% more profitable than companies that don't have engaged employees. So it's not about being nice and fluffy with our employees, it's not about being pleasant, although that's a benefit, it's actually simply good for the bottom line. So there are 7 aspects to the Resilience at Work scale, and I'll go into them in a little bit more detail shortly. But some of them will come very naturally to some of you, and some of them will be harder. Some of them will be more natural for your employees, and some of them will be harder. And all of them can be improved. And the harder the environment you're in, the more effort you need to put into developing them. Actually, I'm going to stick on this one first. So the first is around being really authentic. If you can go to work being yourself, if you can show up as who you are, rather than feeling like, you've got to put on a pretend facade and be somebody else, you will be significantly more resilient. You're going to feel happier. You're not going to feel as depleted in the workplace. Finding your calling, having a purpose, being aligned with the mission of the business. As a business owner, hopefully that's really straightforward. But as an employee, how connected are your people with what you're trying to achieve? How meaningful does their work feel to them? The third is around managing perspective. So really keeping a future focus, focusing on what the opportunities are rather than the challenges. Really being future facing and learning from our mistakes rather than getting into rumination about what could have been different or better. Managing stress, it's the obvious one. When people think about resilience, they think about stress and they all impact stress, but really being mindful about how we keep on top of our stress levels and what we need to do individually to be less stressed. The next is around having cooperation, and that's within your business. So if you have been as unlucky as many of us have been to work in a toxic work environment, an unhelpful, uncollaborative work environment, it gets really hard very quickly. Finding your tribe, finding the people that you can cooperate with, and being careful that that doesn't develop into a negative clique in itself. Because if there's only 3 or 4 of you that are feeling the same way, you can come across to everyone outside of that group as being almost adding to that toxicity if you're not careful. The next piece is around staying healthy. Again, very closely linked with managing your stress, but what are you doing around your physiological health? And then finally, building networks. Events like today, finding people outside of your workplace who are experiencing similar challenges, who are maybe they've been through this before, that it's a mentorship group or it's a professional development group, finding that network outside of the workplace, people that you can lean on and rely upon, is really helpful for building resilience. So how about you? How do you build authenticity? How do you know that you can show up to work being entirely yourself? Anybody got some ideas around it, or had an experience where they've decided to show up to work in a different way and be a little bit more real in the workplace? Anybody brave enough to speak up? Hi, thank you.
I've always kind of felt on edge, I don't know if that's the right word, about certain aspects of my ethnicity, especially in certain places, in certain rooms. When I joined a corporate company, I was in the sales team, only woman on the desk as well. Not many people look like me, and there were times where in between hairstyle changes, I'd have a couple days where I either have to wear a wig or rock my natural hair. And I didn't feel like I wanted to hide my natural features for any reason under a wig. So there were times where I'd wear my natural hair and I was surprised by how it was received. Not that I was expecting them to be like, oh, but you know, I was definitely wowed by the, oh, natural hair, afro, oh wow, kind of response from it, you know? So I guess that's, a little bit of, my resilience in terms of a corporate career and how I showed up for myself.
And thank you for sharing. Has that helped you then be a little bit more brave and a little bit more prepared to simply be you rather than feeling that you had to?
Absolutely. I even started bringing food that's like very
fantastic
from my culture kind of thing. So I was able to feel more comfortable showing up as myself.
And you saw an impact in terms of your confidence and resilience in work because of it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Purpose. Having a sense of meaning in our work is so important. I'm a walking book recommendation engine and I'm sorry for it. But if you've read Daniel Pink's book Drive, he talks about this a lot. And in actual fact proved that he could, that's the wrong way of putting it. I was going to say he could pay people less, that wasn't his purpose. But he showed that basically people who have a real sense of purpose and connection with the work that they're doing are less motivated by money. And actually at the extreme ends are demotivated by more money. And that actually really tapping into somebody's purpose is much more meaningful for them and for the organisation. You have to pay people enough, obviously. So what's the purpose of your business? What gets you up on a Wednesday feeling, you know, it's grey outside, winter's coming, everything's a bit hard, but you're just so excited to go to work? What are the things that really get you going in the for your work?
I guess for me, my purpose is helping our clients. So I get massive satisfaction out of understanding what our client's problem is working out why it's a problem and how we help them strategically to move to wherever they want to get to.
Yeah.
And then when you actually go on that journey with them and you see it at the end, for me that's a huge satisfaction. So that's the purpose that drives me.
Fantastic, thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
Yeah, for me, I think it's, because obviously I've got social media and I do my like coaching and women's business outside of that, but it's for me, it's waking up to that one comment where someone says, oh, thank you, you've really inspired me. So knowing that I've helped one person makes me want to get up every day and do it all over again. Because if you can help one person in one day, by the end of the year, you could have helped 1,000. So that is what, it's getting that one bit of feedback or one comment or it, so what I'm doing is working, so don't give up.
And I think that's really critical as well. It's the little bits, isn't it? So my mission for my business is I create ripples to change the world of work for the better. And it's just those incremental changes and tapping into that. The third piece is around maintaining perspective. So having that solution focus, being able to problem solve instead of ruminating on what's gone wrong. And another book recommendation, I did warn you. Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. Has anyone read it? Ooh. Absolutely remarkable book. He compares and contrasts the aviation industry with the medical industry. And in the aviation industry, every near miss, every mistake, every hiccup of any description, whether that's caught by somebody before it becomes problematic or not, is captured, whether that's through the black box because there wasn't anyone else to tell a story, or through people going, I did this, it wasn't great, this is what I've learned from it, so that everyone can learn from it. And that's why getting onto an aircraft is one of the safest things that we do. Contrast that with the medical industry, where people hide everything, primarily because they're terrified of litigation, but nothing is shared. And there's a lady called Amy Edmondson who did a fairly deep research into nursing in the States. And what she found at first instance was really confusing, because teams of nurses who had a really poor working culture, there was a lot of backstabbing, there was a lot of bitching, clickiness, just generally not positive teams, had really good records in terms of the lack of mistakes made. They just didn't make mistakes. Teams that were really supportive, had huge amounts of psychological safety, really lifted each other up, looked after each other, made loads of mistakes. And it made no sense at all. And then she looked at the next layer and realised that in the really positive, warm, collaborative teams, when they made a mistake, they were like, I gave the wrong meds, this is how it happened, this is what we did, this is how to make sure that we don't make that mistake again, leading ultimately to better patient outcomes. Negative teams, lots of nastiness, no one was going to admit to a mistake, and therefore people continued to make mistakes and wrong meds were given and patient outcomes were worse. So maintaining perspective and saying, you know what, we all make mistakes, we're all human, there is not a single person alive who hasn't cocked up on a monumental scale at least once. The trick is learning from it and maintaining that perspective. Who's good at doing that? Yay. Fantastic. For those of you who aren't brilliant at that, just think on a daily basis, what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, and for the stuff that hasn't gone so well, why, what could I do differently next time, to get into that habit of having that future focus and making it less scary to admit that something's not gone brilliantly. But it's about taking action to do it better next time. The next is around your psychological health, making sure that you're coping with everyday stresses. What are you doing in terms of work-life balance? In a corporate environment, we're often expected to work at longer hours, pick up the phone or the email at the weekend. As business owners, we're even harder on ourselves a lot of the time. So again, I'd ask you to be thoughtful about what are the habits that you have in place to manage that. Do you step away from your desk during the day? If you work from home, do you do a pretend commute where you step out of your front door and walk around the block and back into your house? So at least you get moving at some point during the day. When things are hard, you go outside, get some sunshine, take the dog for a walk, hug a tree, whatever it is that makes you feel a little bit less stressed. Who has good stress release or relief practices? Loads of you. Fantastic. Who would like to share what is the biggest thing that helps you manage your stress?
Getting out for a walk with the dogs.
Yeah.
Getting out to the countryside.
Meditations and cuddles with your cats.
Nice. And it can just be simple things, but diarising to make sure that we remember these things can be really important as well. So next is cooperation. So sharing feedback, giving people positive feedback, getting positive feedback yourself, bouncing ideas off other people, providing support and feeling that you're in a collaborative environment. If you work for yourself, how do you do that? Does anybody work for themselves and have some sense of cooperation or collaboration?
Women's Business Club, coffee and co-working.
Fantastic, Angela. Exactly. And that it fits the cooperation and the strong networks, it's outside of, but finding people who do the same thing as you, the number of clients out there is many. It's not pizza, it's not one slice each. Finding other people who are doing the same thing as you that you can talk to, that you can collaborate with, that you can bounce ideas off is really good, because you'll refer to them, they'll refer to you. It's a positive thing to do for each other as well as for yourself. Cooperation can be really hard if you are in an organisation that's toxic or less helpful, where there's a lot of corporate politics. And I'll come a little bit on to psychological safety towards the end, and things that we can do as leaders within those environments, or if we're working with people in those environments to help. Physiological health. Do you get a decent night's sleep? Do you drink lots of water? Do you eat good food? Do you look after the basics? Or is it the first thing that goes off the to-do list when you're really busy, when you're desperately trying to get some new clients, grow your business, get all of the delivery done, suddenly you realise it's 4 o'clock and you haven't had lunch and you haven't had a drink since your coffee at 11. Making sure that those things are nailed down is really important to our resilience. Is anyone else guilty of forgetting to have lunch? Too many of us. And I think there's such a strong link that we all know now between physiological and psychological health as well. Going out for a run or a walk with the dogs just boosts our physiological but also our psychological health. Being really mindful of that, and again, diarising it, because otherwise it doesn't happen. And then finally, strong networks, as Angela said, Women's Business Club, coffee and co-working, the business lunches, finding professional support networks, working with a coach. Finding a mentor, finding somebody who's been through it before, who can spend some time and talk to you and is on the end of the phone when you're having a wobble. These are things that are really going to help boost your resilience. Life depletes us, sadly. Most of us are leaky buckets. We've got little holes in us, whether that's a bad day at work, a client that's decided to move on, a client that's decided not to come on board, work, stresses generally, life, partner, children, whatever it might be. These things deplete our resilience. And most of the time, when we're in a good shape, the resilience that we top up at least matches or outdoes the depletion. But when things get difficult, or if we're working in environments that are not supportive, that depletion is exacerbated. And my last corporate job, I refer to it as being a bucket that didn't even have a bottom in it. It was like I poured the water in and it was straight on the floor. And that's when we start to get into or towards burnout, and we really do need to be careful. We get to this point where I call it the double bind, because we've got so much to do, we work a bit harder, which means that our effectiveness drops, we stop looking after ourselves, we stop sleeping well, we stop feeding and eating well and drinking the water, we stop going for the walk, we get less effective, so we work harder and we get less effective, and before we know it, we're in a really problematic situation. And I adore this quote. I don't know if anyone's heard it before, but you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes a day, unless you're too busy, in which case, sit for an hour.
That's really good.
Because we need to slow down in order to speed up. So if you are in that position that I think virtually everyone's experienced at one point in their lives, where they think, I just need to press pause on everybody else for 2 days, and I can catch up, press play, off we go. If that's where you're at, take 2 days for yourself, not for your business, not for your to-do list, but for yourself. Relax, rejuvenate, regroup, and then you can go again. Because when we're stressed and when we're not being effective, we can't grow. None of us want to be in the comfort zone. It's relaxed, it's safe, we're bored, everything's easy. We want to be out in that stretch zone where, it's been exciting, there's some challenge, we're being pushed to achieve greater things, we're impacting more people, we're having a greater impact with our business and in our communities. But if we're not looking after ourselves and our resilience isn't where it should be, we then get pushed into the stress zone. And that's where we start to get a bit anxious. It doesn't feel safe. We can sometimes feel a bit panicked. And what happens then, our very prehistoric brain gets into the driving seat and says, I don't think you're safe. I want you to stay in your cave because there's saber-toothed tigers out there. And we will either end up in a fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. So if you're in fight, your cortisol's up, you're maybe more defensive, you're snappy with the kids or the partner. Things just aren't quite clicking for you. And in any conversations with any clients, it's probably going to come off as a little bit spiky as well. Flight and freeze often can look the same, avoiding your tax returns, avoiding your admin, hiding from the stuff that doesn't bring you joy, procrastinating, doom scrolling instead of doing the thing that you need to do, and then working really late into the evening because you're suddenly going, oh, I've got to get this stuff finished. Or fawning, being everyone's best friend, saying yes to everything, riding roughshod over your boundaries, because you're just trying to find some happiness somewhere or to get some sense of a dopamine hit maybe from somewhere. And these things aren't going to help us grow. And when our resilience isn't high, this starts to happen more and more. So again, watching out for it and making sure that we're back into that stretch zone, not out in the stress zone is really important. Does that make sense to people? Can people recognise it? So psychological safety. Some of you are in large businesses or have responsibility for teams, and some of you are solopreneurs at the moment. Is everyone familiar with the term psychological safety? Some. I'm hoping this is visible enough. Organisational context can absolutely make a break when it comes to resilience. And I realise as solopreneurs, it's slightly less important. But if you are thinking about growing your business, scaling your business, getting this right from the start is absolutely crucial. And actually, we can do it to ourselves as well. We can make our own environment feel unsafe. So there are 6 stages to psychological safety, and it starts with that sense of recognising the uniqueness of everyone. And that speaks a little bit to the authenticity aspect that we looked at the beginning of resilience, and that recognition that everyone is unique. If everyone comes to work looking the same, acting the same, being the same, it's really hard to recognise people's unique characteristics. there's such diversity of thought and such diversity of opportunity within all of us. Recognising that uniqueness, tapping into that uniqueness can really help to skyrocket a business or a team. Obviously, everyone is really unique and we need to be really equitable. So there'll be people that you work with who you click with, who are your people, and there'll be people that you work with who you don't click with quite so quickly. Making sure that there's equitability across your team, across the people that you're working with, is really important to make sure you're getting the best out of them. Becoming aware of our own unconscious biases is a really hard thing to do, and I would imagine that many of you are on that journey already. And if you think you don't have any unconscious bias, I promise you that you're not correct. We all do. It's ingrained into us. It's socialised into us from such an early age. It's impossible to not have it. But being aware of it and adjusting or correcting for it is where we would like to be at. Then learning. So the third stage of building psychological safety is allowing people to be safe to learn. And I would appeal to each and every one of you, allow yourselves to be safe to learn. The inner critic often stops us asking the question, I should know that. I don't want to ask the question because I look silly. And we do it all the time. We stop ourselves standing up and asking the question or asking for help because the inner critic or that sense of imposter is telling us that we should already know the answers. And if you've got people in your team, whether they've been there for a week, a month, a year, 10 years, allow them to ask questions, encourage them to ask questions, really engender a sense of curiosity in the business so that people know that they're always safe to learn and that there's never a stupid question. The fourth is failure, and we talked about this a lot in the managing perspective part when we were talking about resilience, that black box thinking, that, allowing failure to happen as a learning tool. That doesn't mean being unprepared to tackle poor performance and allowing people to just drift along, but it's about recognising that it is a really powerful learning tool as long as people are learning their lessons. The fifth stage is autonomy. So being really clear with your people what outcome you need, but giving them the freedom to do it their own way. As businesses scale, as you bring on more people, there is a really strong risk that you can fall into founder syndrome because you do everything at the start yourself, and therefore you know how to do everything. So as you bring people into your business, remember that you've brought them in because they are brilliant at what they do. So give them the autonomy and freedom to do that and to do that really well. Be super clear on the outcome, give them the feedback along the way, but let them do it their own way. You'll get much more out of it when you recognise that they are bringing their own excellence and brilliance to the team. And then finally, challenge, and this is the sweet spot for psychological safety. When you have a team that can go, boss, you're talking crap, that's not the way it needs to be, where they can really challenge you, where there's a sense of positive dissent within the team, where you can debate ideas, where you can realise that actually the whole truly is greater than the sum of parts, because between you come up with ideas that you didn't know existed. And if you're a solopreneur, doing that with your peers, doing that with people like the people in this room, really debating what is the best way of doing this and taking that challenge, checking your ego at the door and allowing those conversations to happen can be really beneficial. That doesn't mean that conflict shouldn't be handled. And I do a different workshop, and if people are struggling with conflict, I can talk about a little bit of that now. Enabling dissent and enabling discussion in the workplace doesn't mean allowing conflict to sit. Conflict is much more insidious, it is much more impassioned, and the people who are in conflict aren't at that point working towards the same outcome. So if people are in discussion but they're working towards a joint outcome, great, this isn't conflict. If they're actively working against each other, if they're pulling in different directions, that's conflict, and you need to get into that with them, bringing them back to what their shared outcome might be. Is anyone struggling with conflict in work at the moment? Is that a useful, yes? Is that a useful side note then?
That is,
Yeah? I'll finish this briefly and then I'll come back to that then. If you can't get to consensus, so you've built this amazing team, they're all feeling really safe, they can all discuss and argue between themselves, and then you get to the point where a decision needs to be made. Sometimes it's great, everyone's in agreement by the end. Sometimes you have to make a decision and make it happen. In many organisations, what then happens is the people who aren't on the winning side, who feel that their voices haven't been heard, can go off behind the scenes and just pull at the threads so that it doesn't work, and then they can say, told you so, I knew that wasn't going to work. By giving them a voice, by making sure that they really know that they've been heard, you're less likely to get that. And there is a magical concept that came out of a company called Basecamp in California. And they produce collaborative project management software. And they've written a couple of books about what their company culture is like. I can't help it, it's another book recommendation. One's called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And what they say is at the end of that conversation, the people who still disagree say, I disagree and I commit to making it work. So they're publicly saying, you know what, we've had the discussion, I'm still not on board, but I will do everything I can to make sure it works anyway. And there's so much power in that. They've made a public declaration, they kind of signed a contract with their colleagues, and the instances that they have of people therefore going behind the scenes and picking up the threads is significantly less, if not non-existent. Yeah, so there's no skunk works to derail going on in the background then. People are aligned. So conflict at work. When you've built psychological safety and there's still conflict, or if you're working within an organisation that doesn't have psychological safety to begin with and you have conflict, it can be really hard to get in there and get to the bottom of it. Would you like to, or would you be prepared to share a little bit about the sort of conflict or not?
Yeah, I think I could briefly say we're a medical team, nurses. So that was quite when you mentioned earlier about the nurses. So when people come from the NHS to transfer into the private sector, which is what we are, I think there's a huge transition that they're not quite sat in a private section yet. So it's trying to get them to comply with the needs of the business. And that conflict is now turning out into the negative being fed into other members of the team, and it's kind of transpiring.
Yeah.
Control.
Thank you. So the first thing is trying to understand the people who are pushing back against this. What is it? Where's their challenge? What are they struggling with in terms of the concept? So sometimes we find ourselves in an environment that feels scary for whatever reason, and a lot of conflict is born from fear. So is there a way of tapping into what they're scared of? What would compliance look like for them? What are they losing by doing it that way? Or what are they gaining by continuing to do it the way that they're doing it? So that can be one of the first steps, to really lean into understanding where they're coming from. So as humans, we tell ourselves stories all the time. So they're telling themselves a story. They have a narrative about what's happening and why they don't want to get on board with it. And you have a narrative about why they're not getting on board and what that means. So if there's a way of being able to build a bridge so that you can each understand each other's narratives and really get to the bottom of, well, why is that important to you and why does that not work for you and why? Yeah, I feel sometimes like I'm a toddler, but why? But why? But there's some real power in asking why 5 times. Apparently that really gets to the root of it. The next thing that can really help is working out what is it that everybody wants to achieve. So what's your top level joined outcome? And trying to ladder back what you're wanting to have change or what you're wanting them to do differently to what their required outcome is as well. So finding that thing, and it might be at a very strategic level to be able to find something where you both meet if there's quite a chasm between you. But finding that thing where you both have got this thing that you want to have happen, that there's a real joined outcome, and trying to align the conversations with that outcome can be helpful. And then my final tip for it is if people are really, really struggling and really not feeling safe, using contrasting statements can take the heat out of the conversation. So you start off by saying what you're not trying to do or what you don't want to have happen. And sometimes that can be what their fear is. So I'm not trying to say that everything that you've ever done is totally rubbish, whatever it might be. But what I am trying to do is bring us towards the outcome that we all need for us to be successful as business. So you kind of take what they're scared of, what they're fearful about, and let them know that that's absolutely not where you're coming from. And that can help that, they're in that physiological situation. They're in fight or flight because they're stressed. And it can help them regulate their physiological state so that you can then have a reasonable conversation. But if you're in a conversation with somebody and they are clearly in fight, flight, freeze mode, you need to almost step out of the conversation for a little while and let them regulate and let you regulate and then come back to it as well. Does that help?
Can I ask a question?
You
On
can.
the back of conflict. So we run our own business, and I had an incident last week where it's more with a client, so not an employee, actually somebody who is paying you for your services, and you feel like this isn't a great working relationship.
Mm.
So it sort of ended up becoming conflict. So do you have any advice?
That is a great question. So the first thing I would say is and it's harder in retrospect, but making sure that your contracts are really clear and that you've got boundaries in your contract so that it's really straightforward what is and what isn't acceptable, what is and what isn't on the table. If you're in a situation where that's not written out contractually, I think it's about letting them know what the impact of their behaviour is and what you would prefer to see moving forward. Sometimes there's an acronym big, so behaviour, impact going forward. It's just a really quick way of remembering how to give feedback in the moment. So this is what you did, this is what it meant, it's not helpful, this is what we need to have for the future. And then being honest with yourself about whether they are going to respect boundaries in the future or whether it's going to be problematic longer term and therefore whether they're a client that you want to have or whether they're ultimately more trouble than they're worth, to be fair. Sometimes it's not meant to be.
Which is a solution I've come to. But it was really hard to get there.
Yeah. So what would you do? Did you have warning signs beforehand?
I had red flags from the first meeting. It was one of those situations where you're kind of like, well, we need the business, and actually, this woman, she seems like a great person.
Yeah.
So, maybe I can iron out those red flags, and I couldn't.
Hands up who's had a red flag for a potential client they've signed up and then regretted it. Hands up who's had a red flag and the customer's turned out to be a dream. Ooh, interesting. One. I'd love to know
Sometimes you're
why.
wrong, aren't you?
Sometimes you are.
And red flags are often instinctive, and sometimes the relationship changes and builds,
Yeah.
and the way in which you manage that works out.
Fantastic, thank you for sharing that. But yes, we all do it. Contract, boundaries, and quick feedback. So what I would like you all to do, or invite you all to do, is to make a commitment to one thing that you're going to do differently to boost or maintain your resilience. And one thing that you'll do differently if you are working with other people to either help their resilience or help develop that sense of psychological safety. And in the interest of accountability, I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and tell them what you're going to do and agree to keep in touch and keep each other on track with that.
So you know your purpose.
One thing that you can commit to boost or maintain resilience, and one thing that you're going to do with people that you work with or people that you collaborate with, either to help them boost their resilience or to develop a sense of psychological safety for them working with you.
And I've spent too much of this year out there. I had breakdowns. I did. Too much. I mean, it was it's really good reading. But it's made me really panic attacks.
Okay, so you're either
I need some time in the centre or in the to be told to get it home instead of you know, you live with that. Yeah. I can't rush it. Still have nerves. My book, I don't desire to never form as a practice.
About a minute left to make sure everyone's had a chance to talk.
Yeah, it's not hypnosis, just speak for 5 minutes, just breathe
It is. I mean,
You can wrap up your conversations and carry on over lunch if you want to pick it back up again. Does anyone have any additional questions around psychological safety, around building resilience at work, resilience for your colleagues, or conflict at work, or anything else? Everyone's desperate for lunch. Hi.
I offer consultancy to individuals, but also to NGOs and charities. And sometimes the conflict I see is that boards of trustees, their kind of main motivation is economic, financial, legislative. And then you might have a CEO who's kind of quite similar, but the kind of people working on the ground doing the grassroots work are really purpose and heart-led. And the conflict there is between those two things, where they can see each other's side, but fundamentally they're not going to change how they're showing up at work and like what their core motivation is. So I'd love to know your thoughts on how you navigate from an organisational perspective. You do need both of those things. You need the heart and the head. You need someone that's looking at money and income and bottom line, and you need people who like absolutely care and show good work. So I'd just love to know your thoughts.
Great question, and I think you're absolutely right, that tension is always going to exist. And I think a really key part of it is enabling the discussion to make sure that the discussion isn't shut down. So often I've seen in businesses, we can't afford it, let's just stop talking about it. Rather than getting curious, well, what would it mean if we could do this? What would it mean for the bottom line? What would it mean for our customers? What would it mean? And therefore, what is secret option C? So too often we go to an assumption that it's win-lose, and often there is another way, which is win-win. I'm not going to tell you all to read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because I've given you too many book recommendations already, but he talks a lot in that around finding win-win and how to get really curious about what is the art of the possible. Sometimes it's just about reframing the problem, and there might be a solution that doesn't cost as much, that does have a more positive impact on the bottom line, and means that you get to do what you need to do on the ground. So I think opening the conversation up faster than is often the case, allowing creativity, different angles to it, before going, right, okay, we can or we can't, but making sure that the discussion's happening.
Can I share something?
Yeah, of course.
So something that we do at work a lot is around proof of concepts and pilots. So often another way of either proving something works or not is to actually do a small test, pilot, proof of concept, and that might be a way of evidencing your idea is going to work, or actually proving probably isn't. And either way, it's a good outcome.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you for your time and your attention. There is a sign-up sheet on the table there. If anyone would like a free strategy session about how to unlock performance in your team, build resilience at work, build psychological safety, drop your details on there and I'll get in touch and we'll set up a session. Alternatively, if I can get this to work, it looks better on this screen. It looked really fuzzy when I did this yesterday. I've got a QR code as well. Connect to me on LinkedIn. I waffle about this stuff a lot there. Feel free to drop me a note if you've got any questions or would like a conversation about how to improve this for you and your business. Thank you.